So why are we talking about predicting impact? We're accounting for more than $1 trillion spent last year. So the combined philanthropic and impact investing totals likely exceeded $1 trillion. This is a calculation I put together based on different reports, but we're looking at about $1 trillion. And yet why we can estimate, approximately how much we spent towards social impact, we're much less able to estimate the resulting value of those investments. So what was that investment worth in the end? And while some organizations, funders, and investors have made progress in measuring their impact, most merely still count the number of individuals they reach. And a very important thing for everyone in the sector to remember is that reach does not equal impact. So whether you work in an NGO or social enterprise, or you fund these efforts through grant making, CSR, impact investing, measuring impact is one of the most common pain points you face. It is often seen as too expensive, too time consuming. It requires too much niche expertise, which is where I come in because I'm very niche for most organizations to complete it. This is a report from Brookings in 2019, particularly on social impact bonds, and everyone was recognizing that the main challenge was impact measurement. So measuring impact isn't just for reporting. We also need this data to determine what course to take, to determine which interventions are most effective and scalable, and which ones aren't working, so that we efficiently use our resources moving forward. One particular challenge with most traditional impact measurement is that the timelines don't match up to our decision-making processes. We're not using data to determine what to invest in the same way that we would use forecasts in traditional finance. And in its absence, a lot of decisions are made with subjective criteria or gut feelings about what issues are important and what approaches will work best to solve them. And if there's one thing that COVID-19 has taught us, it is the value and necessity of good predictive data. And 2020 has definitely felt like this cartoon more than a few times. So what does this crystal ball of impact look like? While there are different approaches that have been taken by other organizations, we first started working on this at TIG in 2016. We had a client come to us and ask us to evaluate the social value of vaccination, or more specifically, the cold chain refrigeration units that are used to store vaccines, and how that would look over the next 10 years. Through the process of figuring out the best way to do this, we combined elements of social return on investment from social value K, economic cost benefit analysis, and scenario planning principles. So these are the three kind of principles that we've combined. Different organizations have actually drawn on the same ones in their models as well, and I'm going to talk about those in a little bit, the other examples of how they've done that. But for us, we have something called the Predictive Impact Analysis, or PIA model, that we've come up with. I've tried to simplify this as much as possible in this diagram, but there are many complex layers to this model that I'll touch on as well. So through this model, and everything we do, every piece of work we do starts with an intervention, the service or a product that's delivered, and the identification of measurable output and outcome indicators. Measurable being the key word here. So if we can't measure it, it's not going to help us with our model. And these are very much, again, at the count level, the counting the reach, counting activities, counting completion or delivery of products. And the model needs to know how to predict the values of those initial indicators. So, for example, the number of individuals vaccinated with a particular vaccine, it then links those indicators with their potential impact. And then this is where there's a bit of magic. So all of the assumptions and the causal link between those outcomes and impact are made through validated research. And the results of this research are inputted into a calculator. It's very much a cost-benefit calculator. We custom design them for each of our programs. Different grant-making organizations have created ones that are more templated for each of their programs. And then we quantify as much of that value through that calculator as possible. So essentially what we're doing there is we're linking an indicator we can measure, the reach of an organization and the quality of that reach, to research that quantifies the impact of that reach. And this is the really key to any sort of predictive analytics, is you're using other research as the basis for your prediction in the future. And this analysis depends on three things that we all need to be able to do this, which is monitoring systems to ensure we're actually meeting targets and those indicators set. The value can predict, but then if we're not actually moving forward and achieving that, then the value we've set is not relevant. Valid research on this issue area, and particularly specific to that context. So a lot of the work we do is trying to find research or develop research around a specific geographical area or community that we want to measure impact in. And then some expertise in developing the calculation model. This doesn't have to be a statistician. I'm not a statistician, but someone who understands quantitative research and analysis. And so far, we've been able to apply this model across sectors: clean energy, WASH, education, health, livelihoods, community empowerment. We've done quite a few now, all successfully. So I believe that it can be used in pretty much every sector we've looked at. So what does this look like in practice? Just to give you a quick highlight of the case study I mentioned on the cold chain units. This is a calculator we used. It's in Excel, it's not fancy. And we've now applied this to 10 different countries. So what we've done is create a template where you can just enter the new data for each country. In the template, it will give you the value in that country based on the latest research we found. And one of the wonderful things, and I'll come back to this at the end as well, that was unexpected for us with these reports was that health ministries and governments started using them in those countries to advocate for more funding for immunization. And these are countries with some of the highest vaccine preventable disease burdens. So it's been very useful for them to getting international funding as well as funding within their own government to these programs. I'm going to give you another example quickly, but from a very different sector. So let's say a program sets up a preschool for marginalized communities. We would set up indicators to track the efficiency of the activities they're running. Basically, the number of students they reached, the attendance of those students, the academic progress, that may be test scores, for example. And then we'd be able to link those indicators through international research to the average academic achievement they have over their lives, compared to those without early childhood education. And then we'd also link them to their lifetime income. So we know that having early childhood education increases their income levels later on in life, as well as increases the quality for their entire family and future generations. So those educated individuals, their children will actually be better off. And we can do this with any research that provides a valid link between the completion of preschool at a certain level and benefits later in life. And when we aggregate all of those, of course, there's a lot of, and this is where it's a little bit the magic again, but there's a lot of details that go into taking assumptions and making sure we're not over quantifying things that are not necessarily related to the program itself. So we can't just assume every value can be achieved, and we have to make sure that we're validating each assumption we make in that model as we do it, and we can justify it if we're presenting that model. And then all of that is quantified together to really return a value statement. For this, for example, it's that the social value of this program would be $10 million per year based on the findings. You've also probably heard the phrase, for every $1 invested, there's a $4 return on investment. That's very highly used. And I just want to make a quick note here of the different roles stakeholders take in this process of PIA. So the funder or impact investor that we've worked with is ideally the sponsor of this research. They're the ones that are going to bring somebody in to do this research, but they're also going to pay for the analytic tools and process. The implementing organization, so in this case, the one running the preschool organization, should be the one monitoring the results. So they need to have those targets and they need to monitor the number of students, but the fairly basic level of output level. And then a researcher, internal or external to the organization or the funder, would help create the model and run the analysis. And then it's really vital that we encourage global research organizations, particularly in the academic institutions, to continue to create credible research to link those outcomes and impact. So sometimes what we do in our work is we identify gaps in research. This hasn't been looked at yet, and we reach out to partner organizations to say this is a great focus for research that will help the sector. Ultimately, with this breakdown of stakeholders, we'd like to reduce the burden on implementing organizations to measure their impact and let them focus more on their program delivery. We just know it's costly, it's difficult, it requires a lot of expertise, and so this should reduce the burden just to tracking their programs, which they're normally most organizations are tracking anyway, so this should be easier. I'm just going to quickly now talk about how this is catching on, how forecasting impact is catching on. So the approach is really spreading. There are multiple other organizations with similar approaches. Acumen Fund links outputs to expected impact in their reporting on their grantees. There's an organization called Y Analytics that spun out of the RISE Fund to calculate the value of impact investments based on their model. I'm going to show their calculation model in a second. Robin Hood Foundation puts each of its 100 plus grants through nonprofits through a cost-benefit analysis each year, which is very akin to what we just looked at. And then IFC has created a guide for this called Anticipated Impact Measurement and Monitoring, and that's available online freely. So I encourage anybody to look that up if they're really interested in the technical aspects of this. So just quickly looking at Y Analytics model. This is a little different than the one I just showed with the line, but very useful. So they've created an impact equation. Of course, again, there's many layers behind this, but they use this to determine the potential value of interventions. And you'll notice that breadth or the reach of the organization or intervention is part of the equation, but also depth and longevity are factored in. So I've talked a lot about data on this side, and I just want to take a moment to see, bring in tech to this. So far, we've used technology in very basic ways in the sense that we've, created our models on technology, and we've drawn research from global technology, and we've collected survey data through mobile platforms. But the ideal future of PIA, in my mind, will use technology better in two ways. One, we'll really embed tracking systems in the initial phase for organizations so that we know if they're on track or not very early on. Those may be mobile tools or otherwise, but just to keep organizations with an easy feed of data from on the ground. And then also in an ideal scenario, the calculation and the model part will be AI-based. And we'll use AI to scrub the internet for the latest research, but also to improve the model itself and make better analysis than I do as a human. I think that's a great use of AI in the future. We're not there yet, but I would really encourage people to develop pieces in this space if they're interested. And finally, and very importantly, I just want to not touch my mouse so fast. I want to touch on the applications. So the last 4 pieces of how we apply this in the field and how this could improve the sector. So the first one is due diligence. Quantifying the potential impact of programs allows us to compare dissimilar programs. So we can compare education to environmental protection, apples to oranges basically. And even similar programs, we can compare them more effectively by focusing not just on their reach, so we don't fall into the trap of saying this program is better because it reaches 1,000, but this is only reaching 500. We also take into account the depth and quality of the program, which is really important. The next is fundraising. So we found that presenting a number, and people in previous sessions today have mentioned this as well, presenting a number or a quantified value is a highly effective way of bringing funders on board. While it's beneficial to talk about the work you do more broadly and qualitatively, this is really helpful, especially in the impact investing space. And I also hope that this helps to remove biases from programs, that someone's friend's cousin runs or something that has a cute photo of a smiling child. And especially now, I hope it moves away from biases towards organizations run just by Westerners and helps promote this shift of looking at locally run organizations that are just as effective, if not more effective, delivering services because they also can then advocate for their investment. Of course, that's a cultural shift that needs to happen for more ways than just data, but I do hope it comes about. So the third thing is evaluation and reporting on outcomes, particularly in impact investing and the social impact bond space. We really need to move away from just reach or just focusing on monetary returns and understand what social value is holistically. And of course, this feeds back into due diligence and fundraising for those organizations. And finally, and this again came from my example, and I didn't realize the scope of this, but we really need to think about policy reform being an outcome of this. As we saw in our work on vaccination, PIA can help focus governments on what really works. towards making the best investments. This is true now more than ever as we determine the best path forward to the pandemic. I was in a webinar the other day and someone mentioned that trillions and trillions of dollars had been lost because of coronavirus, which is mind-boggling but very unhelpful. If we can break down the cost-benefit to society of different policies, we can make more informed decisions, not just on economics or gut feelings, but on the predicted social value of different scenarios. So that's my hope going forward, and also in light of the pandemic, that we can focus on that.